action, and maybe it's left leg away from right leg. So then creation of an angle. We're going to focus on the angle between my two legs, or expanding that. Seeing what's already happening here is the angle between my two arms also. Arms and torso, arms and leg. So I'm changing where my attention is, to what angle I am creating, where it is on my anatomy. So, say maybe changing the tool, keeping the process the same. So thinking of feeling, sensing segments and their distance, their relationship to each other in space. That process then, I could shift it slightly and begin changing my attention to locomotion through space. Back again to that. So the process of angular sensation direction becomes a tool for the idea of locomotion. Keeping that tool of line, body segment, changing it from locomotion to turning. Maybe that's another form of locomotion. Polar coordinates. So maybe having a drastic change, if you will. I'm still vertical, still standing, still in the studio, still the same pants on. It's not that drastic of a change. Going from locomoting, turning, angular sensation to stillness. Different body tone. That came back. That kind of a body tone came back, so what does that mean? I don't know. Meaning being the average of everyone's opinion of something. Little math joke.
Finding an end.
Drastic change to solo body maintenance practice. Thank you. Thank you all for coming to Fractal, Rhizomatic, change in action during solo improvised dance making. S-I-D-M. So, I was using the ideas I've been figuring out, collecting. They're not really any new ideas, I'm just taking them together and putting them in a new situation. And using them to create a solo. And then during the lecture part, there will also be an ongoing performance by my lower left colleagues, Ian, Margaret, and Kelly. And then the lenses that stuff that I'm talking about, you can then use as a lens to view what they're doing, if you want, or you can just ignore what I'm saying and watch them dance. So, solo improvised dancing. What is improvisation? Very big topic. Don't want to do that whole topic right now in 2 minutes, but several ways of thinking about it. Is one is continuum of deliberation. Another one is choice among vocabularies. Another one looking at Aristotle's division of labor and using that to describe improvisation. So, continuum of deliberation, that's from Nina Martin's dissertation. She talks about there's a spectrum, a continuum, and on one side is more set works that are predetermined, deliberated, you know, what's going to happen when, who's going to be in it, music, and at the other end, more improvised, you don't really know what's going to happen next, you might not know who's even in it. So it's an improvised being more at this end of less, there are certain parameters that I'm going improvising, I know I'm going to be in this room, I'm going to dance how I dance, but within that framework, it's still not totally predetermined. Choice among vocabularies in Susan Foster's book, Reading Dancing, she talks about improvisation being the freedom to choose among vocabularies and to use any of the 3 syntactic principles. I forget what those are. Sorry. Go read the book. I'm trying to sell her book. No. So you can choose what kind of movement you want to do within your vocabulary, within different vocabularies that you know from different dance styles. Actually, one way to improvise. Another way to think about it is Aristotle's division of labor. And he just breaks labor down into the thinking part, the noesis, and the poesis part, the part of doing it. And in this book by Lukács I was reading, he talks about the architect and the bricklayer. The architect makes the plan, draws it up, says where all the bricks are going to go, and then the bricklayer gets the plan, usually later, and then does it. So it's 2 different people, and so improvisation is the architect and the bricklayer become one person. He or she is making the plan at the same time that he or she is doing the plan. And yeah, so we can argue about improvisation later. Dance, what is dance? Oh my gosh. It's this. It's intended action, consciously willed and controlled, governed by a decision to move on the part of the dancer. That's from an article. That's one way to look at it. Agree, disagree. So I'm looking at it as dance being what I'm choosing on some level to do. Body, mind. I'm trying not to separate them. I don't think I'm thinking it or like my foot thought of it, but yeah, on some level, on the body-mind thing, I'm intending the action. So now we change. What is change? There's a bunch of verbs in English that are similar to change. Mutate, adapt, resolve, shape, evolve, fluctuate, diverge, substitute. Mutate, redo, replace, and they're nouns of change. Adjustment, modulation, mutation, temper, translation, switch, shift. So then when looking in, then a little bit more about change. I interviewed Julian Hamilton as part of my research, and we were talking about change, and he said basically that this is paraphrasing him, so this is his quote, but I'm paraphrasing this quote, that there's never a dance without change. As soon as you move through the space, there's change spatially, change rhythmically, change in breathing, change in what your arms are doing or whatever. There's always change. Even if you do nothing and just hold still, there's still going to be change in time. So, also another thought of change. Change I see, because you could say dance can't happen without change, that it's an inherent structure. Maxine Sheets Johnston, in Thinking and Movement, anyone interested in grasping the physiognomic character of the dance as it is experienced is led to the heart of that experience and to an understanding of its inherent structures. So change, I would say, is one of them. The body being another inherent structure. Kind of an obvious point, I guess, but that's academia. So grasping the physiognomic, so at face, physiognomy in the face, at the face value of, so I've been trying to look at dance through a phenomenological perspective, going back to what the dance is itself. So for me, that means going back to the body, location in space, the timing, the muscle tension, not the meaning that I might be generating in somebody else's mind, not my emotional state while creating it. So that could be a tool. So what versus how. So what is changing, using what is changing, the anatomy of where the body is in space and its actions, what is changing, to research how it is changing, to understand the how. So there's two different things. I kind of like to think of that as like acceleration and speed. How fast how you're changing sort of one level removed from going from A to B at that speed. What is your acceleration and deceleration on that trip, sort of one step away. Change in the actions. So through my research, I've been looking at actions that the dancer does as consisting of a toolness, and a processness. What does that mean? Here's an interesting thought, kind of points towards the idea. The same action may be expressed in different physical performances. I may assassinate the Prime Minister, either by shooting or planting a bomb, and that different actions may be expressed in a single pattern of physical movements. A kiss may be expressed in a single pattern of physical movements. You can kiss as an expression of love, or kiss as a sign of betrayal. So he's using slightly different words than I am, but you could say that the kiss, and it sort of goes towards meaning, but that one thing can happen, the assassination of the Prime Minister, maybe a bad example, but can be accomplished by two different means. And the kiss itself can express two different things. So it's kind of what I'm relating the toolness and processness. So tool, something that can be used to complete a task. And in dance, it's frequently often the body, the joints, the muscles, the bones. It's also, a tool can be a physical action that is being used to accomplish a task or activity. Such as when I was looking at my arms and legs, feeling that distance, the process of feeling that distance and creating that distance led me to then go through space. So this process became a tool when I started locomoting through space. So a tool is not just necessarily the anatomy. So a process is a physical action or activity that an anatomical tool can do. It makes use of anatomy, space, and time, and consists of slight change as the material somewhat not develops, not necessarily transformed, but it changes without being totally drastically different. So how I've been looking at it is with the terms rhizomatic and fractal. Rhizomatic coming from botany. Rhizomatic plants, they have roots that grow perpendicular away from the main plant, perpendicular to gravity, and then pop up. So location A of plant, location B of plant, and there's no visible above ground connection between those two plants. And the root that pops up, that plant can then become a fully formed plant. It's not just a root anymore, it becomes a full plant. So relating that to improvised dancing, even if there's a drastic change, that change, that dance, to become a fully fledged dance. It's not necessarily beholden to the previous plant. Got to have to lose them there, so here they are. In Thousand Plateaus, they talk about a rhizome consisting of heterogeneous elements, a wasp and an orchid being two different things. Rhizome also operates by variation, being anti-genealogy. Genealogy meaning there's no connection through generations, like genealogy being mother, father, grandparents, great-grandparents, so there's no connection. Another way to look at the rhizome is short-term memory. So you don't remember what happened at point A or point B. Another fourth idea from that book is a rhizome can be connected to anything. So anything can happen before or after any given change. The other sort of side, more like the transformer, which supports the fractal, coming from Latin meaning to break. I find it kind of funny that I'm using that word, but it comes from meaning break as opposed to develop it. But, yeah, the term was coined by Benoit Mandelbrot, a mathematician, Polish-French mathematician, and he sort of developed a whole new branch of mathematics, as far as I understand it, and using the term fractal. So what is a fractal? A fractal can be made by continually adding one figure to another figure, smaller version of another figure, again and again and again and again. Basic figure called an initiator. One example of that is the Koch snowflake. So you've got the initial triangle, and you add the small thirds there, you add another and another on each side. And so that can go on infinitely, mathematically. Looking something like this, and you keep adding on and on and on, more and more triangles. I find it a fascinating idea that Koch snowflake, as it keeps going with all the permutations, you can generate an infinite line, an infinitely long perimeter, but within a finite area. So I think that's a cool idea. So then the idea of that applying to solo body dancing, then can you keep adding more tools or processes to your actions? Would that be possible to continually, infinitely add to what you're doing? Another way to look at it, similar, is the fundamental concept of fractal geometry is the repeated use of geometric protocols. So like as the Koch snowflake kept adding triangles, the Sierpinski triangle keeps removing triangles. You have the initiator, and you take away the middle triangle, and then from each triangle you take away the other middle triangle, and that can keep going infinitely, theoretically. So then what would that be for solo improvised dancing? Could you keep taking away actions, tools, and processes from what's happening? Would that then lead to stillness? But then you could say stillness is another action that I'm doing with my body. So I don't know. Another fractal is seen as a graphical representation of the repeated use of a mathematical formula. So you have a mathematical formula, they're used iteratively, and the result of each iteration being fed back into the formula. So you have formula, whatever this is, you put in a number, it spits out a number, you put that number back in, and over and over and over again, creating a different, so here's a version of that, the same mathematical formula, create change. So the idea that fractal change, type of fractal change, if it keeps going and going and going, you eventually get very different material. If you remember where you were or when it started. If you don't remember, then it's rhizomatic and hey, that's the two. So like the accretive additional change of the Koch snowflake, you keep adding processes and tools. The reductive change, you keep taking away processes and tools. Or you can have evolutionary change, like the Mandelbrot, that last one. So that a repeated fractal change creates drastic difference. So in essence, over time, a fractal change is like a rhizomatic change. So fractal versus, they're in a fight. The fractal has similar elements, the rhizomatic has different elements. There's a genealogy of what came before in the fractal change. The rhizomatic, there is no connection, there is no through line from what happened. Fractal, like looking at the Mandelbrot one, the evolving, like you look at the beginning of it with that sort of black sphere, and then at the end it had variation. If you didn't know that was the connection, if you didn't have a long-term memory of that, it would be a fractal change. Rhizomatic change. But since you watched it, you got to see the evolution, it's a fractal change. So the idea of tool and process and the action, and then the fractal change and the rhizomatic change, and then also no change, because right, you could have the toolness of an action change, but the processingness not change. So putting those ideas together generates 9 kinds of change. It's all we can do is 9 kinds of change. Don't try to do anything else if possible. No, this one, no change, is, there is still change within no change in tool, no change in process. It's not stillness, like with the walking, right? If I'm walking on the grid, the shape of my body, the body of my shape is still changing. My location in the room is still changing, but how I'm changing isn't changing. What is changing, but not how. Yeah? Take it or leave it. So, yes, we're limited. We're limited with these 9 changes. But if you took a 10-minute dance and broke it up into 30-second segments, and after every 30 seconds you did one of the 9 changes, these are the number of possible different dances you could do just based on what kind of how you change. So there's still all the other what you're still doing, which is even a bigger number. So we have, what's this, 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quad, quintillion. 1.35 quintillion dances that could be made just looking at how change is created. Yeah, so let's get to it. So like I spoke about earlier, these idea of changes are for me a way to look at dance and a way to make dance. The conditions of a true critique and a true creation are the same. I can use what I'm doing to make something, to tell you about it. You can now use it to watch them, to see the toolness, the processiness, to imagine what else is possible for their toolness and processiness that's happening. So it's a tool for creation and for observation, for doing and viewing. Questions I have. Does rhizomatic change actually exist? And maybe all changes are actually fractal, because there's always going to be some sort of through line. I'm always going to have my same body when I'm dancing. I'm always going to be in the room. I'm not like an electron. I can't tunnel into another space in the room instantly with a totally different shape. Sometimes I think, yeah, there's no rhizomatic change. And another question is how many processes, like I addressed earlier, how many processes and tools can be removed in terms of like the Sierpinski fractal, or how many can be added like the Koch? Can you keep going infinitely, just as those fractals can go infinitely? Is it possible for the dancer, the improvising dancer, to do that infinitely also? What does that mean? Or even if you're doing the evolutionary fractal change, the Mandelbrot kind, what would that be like to continually evolve your change? Again, where this rhizomatic change exists. Because like, if you look at Deleuze's example of the wasp and the orchid, they're really not that different. They're both carbon-based life forms. They both require oxygen, sunlight, and sugar. They're both terrestrial, they're not aquatic. They both have a finite lifespan. They're both forms of life. So they're not that different. I mean, I would say like a wasp and a bar of iron are more different. So maybe this is splitting hairs, but just even within the idea of what rhizomatic is, there's still a connection that we can think of, that we can create for ourselves. Is this rhizomatic or is this fractal? So, yeah, like our all is actually fractal. So solo improvised dance making always uses the body. There's no electron tunneling. How much memory are we choosing to use to look at the dance that we're making, or you're doing, or you're observing? Because we will always be able to see some sort of connection. Humans are story-making animals. We want to understand the relationship between A and B. So we're going to try to make a connection. And back to phenomenology, that every act that's composed of A is also composed of A's predecessor. So what came before A determines what A is. And then also what comes after A is also somehow in A. So, kind of like this, Husserl's time consciousness graph thing above. I don't really understand it, but it somehow works for me. That I have this event C, and then later in time it's different, it's D, but there's still some part of C within D. And then later in E, there's whatever D was is still somewhat in E, and there's even some leftover from C in D, which is in E. So where you are is determined by where you were, it determines where you're going. So then, if everything is fractal and not rhizomatic, what's the point? Well, it's going back to Anne Pake's idea of dance being an intended action that's consciously willed and controlled, governed by a decision to move on the part of the dancer. I would say that change, then, is an intended action, consciously willed and controlled. So I'm consciously willing, deciding for myself, do I want to have a drastic change, rhizomatic change, do I want to have a fractal change? And then within that change, do I want to change the toolness of the action, do I want to change the processness of the action? So I, for myself, am deciding that I'm governing the change, deciding to move on the part of the dancer. So, there you have it. It's all explained. You all understand it perfectly. And that's it. Thank you all for coming.